Hi guys, welcome to Togainu no Chi, is that how you say it? This is a blast from the past, isn't it? Oh god, this is 15 years ago, back when I was a wee little lad, and now I'm a big little lad. And, I've never played this, I remember watching the anime for it a long time ago. I don't remember much of it. I remember a few characters' faces, and I distinctly remember one of the characters that was blindfolded and like in a leather suit that some other guys walked around like he was a dog. Because that was the gayest part of the whole anime. Because the anime had no gay parts in it, period. Which is just the truth. They just sanitized the gay out of it, except for that walking kink that was just left there. So let's just start. You know, after Dramatical Murder, I didn't think I could handle another Nitro plus Chiral game, but what is this text speed? Hello, Grandma. Config menu? Auto mode playback speed? Is that what I'm looking for? No, text speed. Girl, you can just get on there. We'll have you like 90. There. Alright. Yeah, after Dramatical Murder, I did think I'd want to play one of these games, but then I remembered watching the anime for this, and someone mentioned it on my channel recently, and then it made me think, maybe I'm in the mood for another train wreck. Okay. The nation is the focal point of collective identity. So long as they're safe within this symbolic placenta, the people have no need to doubt. Behold the wages of hubris. Yeah. The Third Division. Mankind's Third World War. Why is it an anime when there's a world war, they have to give it some funny name? 3 billion people died, you know. Oh. 20XX AD. As it rode the wave of economic expansion that accompanied its shifting national zeitgeist, the small island nation of Japan started down the path of remilitarization. Good for them. A totalitarian national ideology, control over the citizenry that all but began in the womb, education geared towards producing loyal soldiers, a system optimized for war. War has changed. Or so the people believed. Okay. But the nightmare of war far exceeded their predictions, and the terrible scars left in its aftermath made recovery a distant hope indeed. After the war, the survivors desperate for hope took their drastic measure of splitting Japan in two. What? What does that do? East and West? And that's the way you decided to split it? What? Japan doesn't... It's kind of hard to split it East and West. But go off, I guess. Under the direction of their respective leaders, each side began to rebuild. These efforts... But why did they split it East and West? You still haven't explained why they took drastic measures like that, as you stated. What was the point? These efforts focused at first on rural areas, which had sustained relatively little damage, before proceeding towards the cities, which had suffered by far the worst. This period was marked by a number of dramatic policy changes, all geared towards cutting ties with the past and establishing a new national ideology. Most iconic among these was the rechristening of the former capital. Dubbed the Old Lands, this blasted city was consigned to the oblivion of memory. Huh. Everyone believed that this would clear the way for a better future. 5 years passed. Alas, the cracks from which all had averted their eyes grew wider in the interim. soon threatening to swallow the nation whole. The sudden shift in ideology had left the citizens bewildered, and the abandonment of the former capital had transformed the old lands into a hotbed of crime. The rot was too widespread for the government to contain, and the country was still divided into East and West. What? Why are we mentioning about the East and West again? Oh, what does this have to do with the country being divided East and... You never explained why it was divided. You never explained anything. One of the two sides would eventually govern all of Japan, but unable to guess at the burdens involved, both hesitated to move forward. Additionally, each side held a different vision of how the nation should be reborn. Reunification talks fell apart again and again, and so the future hung on the brink. The brief glimpse of light at the end of the tunnel had begun to recede into darkness. Alright. Yeah. Live or die. Just sleep on it if you know? I guess. It's a little low. I might have to fix this in editing. Because, you know, obviously I set the music low so it's not overpowering. Oh, look, here's our protagonist. Yeah. Yeah, I stan him. I stan him more than Alba, at least. Alba was ugly. People that don't think he was ugly are just... They're delusional. Ugh. Oh, woman spotted. You love them in our yaoi games. And I just saw the little leather walking kink. Alright. Yay. Death. He thought it beautiful. He remembered body bags, human shapes swayed like babes in their gentle embrace. He remembered lowering their zippers to reveal unmoving objects within. And then he started rubbing their legs, and those objects started moving. That was how the soldiers had always looked when they returned to their shelter. He thought them beautiful. To him, they seemed to be asleep. What was death anyway? The cessation of function. The heart stops, the lung stops, the brain stops. The body falls into an endless sleep. Was that not what it meant to die? But was that all? Was there nothing more? He himself was in no hurry to die. But nor did he have any particular attachment to life. Even if he abruptly died in his sleep, that would be just fine. He tried to imagine himself fighting desperately to survive. What would be the purpose of that? What could he hope to accomplish by staying alive? What was the difference between life and death aside from the cessation of one's bodily functions? He pondered these things constantly. Even while watching his fist tear through flesh to shatter the hard bone beneath. Awesome. And the D is just so good. A pleasant numbness spread from Akira's knuckles to his brain, like bubbles in a carbonated drink. I don't even understand what that's trying to describe. The man's knees buckled, and he sank slowly to the ground. The unnatural silence, like a silent movie playing in slow motion, broke the instant he collapsed. All at once, there arose a storm of noise. Noise and more noise. Rough voices clashed in disharmony, stinging Akira's ears. The man had been huge, both taller and heavier than Akira. He had looked down at Akira with eyes that pitied the ant he was about to crush beneath his heel. But that hadn't lasted for long. The match had ended almost as soon as it began. Now the bitter howls of those who'd lost their bets mixed with the cries of those thrilled by the victory. Some approached with repellent smiles, asking for comments like television reporters. Countless fists smacked him on the shoulders, as if to laud the return of an old war buddy. Naked light bulbs swayed in the dimness, conspiring with the shadows to make the spectators stand out oddly. The crowd was gathered in one corner of a filthy back lot. All were young, though they ran the gamut from those who had never seen blood before to those who had seen too much. They were all here for one reason, to witness a competition of strength. Shaking the blood from his fists, Akira pushed his way through the onlookers and headed for the cool depths of the alley, as if to flee their clinging eyes. He did not even spare a glance for the man he had just defeated. The air he inhaled was chilly. He pulled his jacket a little tighter around his neck. As the noise of the crowd receded, Akira felt like he was stepping into a different world. About 3 blocks away was the spot where Blaster participated. Blaster participants gathered to rest from the fighting. Someone had scrawled restroom in red marker on the wall. Several youths were already there, smoking or drinking cheap booze as they chatted amongst themselves. Most were participants in tonight's contest, but there were also among them retired fighters who had come to boast about past glory. To an outsider, they would look like a gang of delinquents, which was more or less precisely what they were. Akira walked past the others lounging on the roadside, then sat down in his usual spot by the back wall. As he enjoyed the feeling of the cool asphalt on his jeans, he felt a sigh escape his lips. That last opponent, he was nothing. Akira hadn't even broken a sweat. This is how he had been for a while now. No one had been able to so much as bloody his lip. Oh, I guess Akira's just a huge Chad here. Which is why he was more fired up. Which was why the more fired up his audience got, the more empty he felt inside. He was there for the prize money, nothing more. Letting out another sigh, Akira leaned his head against the wall and cast his eyes up at the sky. Tonight there was a lovely full moon. After World War III started, I'm sorry, you mean the 3rd Division. It had been 4 years before people could look at the sky. During the war and in the in the immediate aftermath, most of the population had lived in colossal underground shelters. False. There were children that were separated from their parents and raised to be perfect soldiers. They were taught to kill, to die. Glory to those who slay our enemies. Your life belongs to your country. That's kind of a terrible motto. Yet the war ended before those children ever saw a battle. And the next thing they knew, the very same nation that had called on them to kill and die was asking them to forge a bright, loving future. The reversal was all too reckless and all too sudden. It began with the forced establishment of new family units. Normally one might think that the children would have been returned to the parents from whom they'd been taken, but this was not the case. They decided to do something else very stupid and contrived for, like in an anime, you know, for no real reason. Parents and children who had never met were assigned to one another at random, and forced to live beneath one roof as a family? What? What? Of course, there's no way that these families could function. Abuse, neglect, and violence ran rampant. What? Why was that? Why did that happen? First, Japan gets split into East and West for no particular reason that we can remember. Then children are just assigned to random people. And you get a kid, and you get a kid. Like, what? I don't... This... Okay, I mean, sure. I mean, yeah, we can just assign children at random. Why not? The children have been taught nothing Why, though? The children have been taught nothing except how to fight. How are they supposed to feel? I mean, I don't mean to be poking plot holes in the story this early, but there's been no explanation for anything. What was love, anyway? They had no one to teach them the answer. Their parents were hardly up to the task. Okay. In their confusion, the children turned to battle. Is Akira one of these children? They had been taught that defeating one's enemy was the greatest possible glory. But the war had ended before any of them could put their training to use. These children needed a place to test their strength. How did it feel to fight for one's life? What could you see at the edge of death? As if pursuing the answer to those questions, the children clashed with one another on the streets. Soon these became known as blaster fights. The governments of Japan deliberately turned no idea why the @ symbol's in there. The governments of Japan deliberately turned a blind eye, although they passed new laws to make it plain that deaths would not be tolerated. Yeah, you guys can all fight in the streets as much as you want. Just please don't kill each other. That's our only rule, okay? Just don't kill each other. Oh, thank you, Daddy Government Japan. And so Blaster thrived. It began on the CFC side and quickly spread to Nichiren as well. I guess those are places in Japan? Rules took shape and soon both group and individual fights were being held. Japan's youths were starved for battle, and Akira was one of them. At the sound of approaching footsteps, Akira lowered his gaze from the moon. Two lanky silhouettes stopped in front of him. Ah. Why do I have to look at this with my own two eyes? I don't like this. I don't like this at all. And it looks like Homeboy's his arm is missing. Like, you see his hand over... Can I hide the text box? Okay, it's space in Japanese games. Lunacy. Because I don't think they're using Renpi. Lunatics. Anyway. It looks like his arm is just missing, and then his hand just comes in. Like, I get that he's, like, sort of has it bent, but, like, you should still be able to see the arm a little bit. Or if he has it bent that much, like, the sleeve should be pulled back a little bit or something. Because it just doesn't make any sense. It looks weird. It literally looks like his arm is missing. Anyway, what do you have to say, Ace? Can you please wrap this up quickly, because I don't want to look at you anymore. Oh my god, it's bleeding early 2000s energy, which is when this game was made, so it's painful on the eyes. The man with the yellow mohawk, which Akira thought made him look like a rooster, grinned and raised his hand.
Yeah.
Oh god. The other one, a sickly-looking guy with long black hair, peered down at Akira with a smirk. Each of them was holding a bottle of booze. Akira had a few acquaintances, but these were two of them. They'd been hanging around him ever since he started coming here. He'd ignored them at first, but they kept coming, and before he knew it, talking to them had become a regular thing.
Yo, Akira, また買っちゃったんだって。しかも一発系よ。あんたほんと強えよな、まったく。
I don't think these guys will stay around for long, because I cannot even remember them in the anime. Ace, the one with the mohawk, approached with his distinctive one-legged gait, then plopped down beside Akira. What does he have, a peg leg?
見たかったね。エースのせいで間に合わなかったけどよ。
D, the long-haired one, stood in front of them with a wide grin on his face. After giving D the finger, Ace triumphantly thrust his bottle at Akira. It looked like beer with a red label.
なんだと思う?
Akira had no interest in booze. He shook his head brusquely, causing Ace to purse his lips.
なんだよ、もう祝いがいねえな。こいつはな、ちょっとやそっとじゃ手に入らねえレアモンのビールちゃんよ。高いんだぜこれ。アキラが勝ったっつうから行きつけんとこ頼み込んで出してもらったわけよ。つったってアキラ飲まねえんじゃなかったっけか。
Rocking back to look up, Ace waved his hand dismissively.
いいのこういうの気持ちが肝心だっつうだろ。アキラの勝利のために奮発したっつう俺様の友達思いの心だな。ラストに乾杯。
Ignoring Ace, D raised his bottle high.
あてめ 人の話聞けよ。話し終わってからやれってんだよバカ。何勝手に乾杯してんだよ。
Ace leaned forward, eyes bulging as he lashed out at D.
なげんだもん飽きた。ほら早く乾杯しろよ。
Ace shot a glare at the smirking D, then cleared his throat a bit.
じゃあまあ気を取り直してロストの勝利に乾杯。
Ace hoisted his bottle overhead, clinked it against D's, and downed the beer in one gulp. Lost was Akira's alias and blaster. No one remembered who'd come up with the name. Somewhere along the way, it had simply become the norm. Akira didn't mind. Names meant little to him.
うまいなやっぱ。
God, I hate this guy. D shrugged his shoulders and took tiny sips as Ace laughed heartily, breath reeking of alcohol.
今回のは見れなかったけど相手って結構な肉だるまだったんだろ。どうせまた顔色の一つも変えずサクッと倒しちゃったんだろうな。
In this sector, area Ray, Akira lost. God, that's a... I mean, the sentence is grammatically correct, but it's just not a good sentence. Was known to all as the undefeated champion of the individual bouts. Once upon a time, he had looked forward to these fights, but the enthusiasm of those early battles had vanished long ago, and now not even embers remained. These days, he approached every fight with the same sense of a foregone conclusion. He was there to earn a living, that's all. And because there was nothing else he wanted to do. He wasn't even all that interested in the prize money as long as he had enough to meet his meager expenses. Akira had no dreams, no goals. He stayed alive only because he felt neither the need nor inclination to die.
しかもよまた蹴ったんだって。今度はなんだっけかな。ほらなんか結構有名なでっかいとこ。
本堂グループ。
そうそうそれそれ。せっかくのお誘いをよ。
Ace smacked the palm of his hand with his fist and jabbed an index finger at D. From time to time, corporations scouted blaster fighters who had earned recognition on the circuit. By and large, they were connected to the underworld, Yakuza, or private security, but in this day and age, having someone to pay your way was worth a lot. Most fighters jumped at the chance. If you were good enough, you might even get an offer from the world of pro sports. Unsurprisingly, Akira had no interest in any of this. He'd need more than one hand's worth of fingers to count the invitations he'd refused up until now. So, like, 2 hands? The Hondo Group recruiter had looked as if he had been trying to advertise his Yakuza ties. Akira recalled his gaudy, Nova-rich dress, but not his face or what he said. Akira was only here because he didn't mind fighting. He'd never given any thought to his future. If he ever ran out of prize money, he supposed that he could always find work as a day laborer. He saw no need to think any farther ahead. Ace and D, who would automatically keep the conversation going whether or not Akira had anything to say, were actually rather well built despite their gangly looks. Their nails were black with dirt and grime, and their knuckles bore the telltale scars of a street fighter. Was the money really worth the sweat and blood they'd shed? Either way, there was no shortage of blaster participants looking to get rich or just let off some steam.
俺たちで組んで優勝狙っちゃおっか。最強サンバカギ兄弟とかってチーム名にしてさ。
ネタチームかよ。
Dave's bottle was almost empty, even though he had been taking little sips, and he waved it as he joked around. Ace laughed brusquely. They were nearing full-on drunkenness.
最強っつえばさ、ペスカコシカみてえになってみてえよな、いっぺん。
Ace wiped tears of laughter from the corner of his eyes as he murmured dreamily. Pessy? Akira wasn't familiar with the name. It must have shown on his face.
え？嘘。
As soon as they noticed Akira's confusion, the two friends' eyes went wide.
アキラまさかペスカコしか知らねえの？ガキでも知ってるぜ多分。
ありえねえ、超ありえねえ、ブラスターのチャンピオンが。さすがだぜ。 仙人見て
Akira scowled, feeling like an idiot. Even he knew he was being made fun of. As if it pleased him to have a one-up on the champion, Ace put on a gleeful smirk and wagged his index finger from side to side.
親切な俺様がボスに説明してやるやフェスカコシカってのはな通称コート率いるちょっと前に一世を風靡したエリアゴースト出身のチームやそらもう今のアキラみたく連戦連勝負け知らずでさ向かうところ敵なしそう最強チーム
Ace balled his hands in a trembling fist, as though recalling the excitement he'd felt back then. Come to think of it, Akira had a feeling he'd heard the name before, but he couldn't recall where.
まあ凶悪の凶を取って最強とも呼ばれてたけどな
D's interjection wiped the grin off Ace's face.
悪名高いことでも有名だったからなめちゃくちゃひでえこととか平気でやってたもんな
でそういう凶悪なことをいっぺんやってみたいとは
D grinned maliciously, crossing his arms.
誰もんなこと言ってねえだろそんぐらい強くなってみてっつってんだよこのタコ
Ace howled, waving his hands theatrically. Ace slammed his fist down on top of D's hands.
警察と勇敢に戦った俺の武勇伝を聞かなかったのかお前はお前こそなその薄気味悪いロン毛とっとと切りやがれってんだ
Patting his injured right knee, which he claimed often had been wounded in a righteous battle against the forces of tyranny, Ace reached out and seized hold of D's hair.
だってバイクでひったくりやったとこ見つかって追っかけられて事故っただけじゃねえかよどこら辺をどうすれば武勇になるんだよ
D wailed, pulled forward by his hair. Leaning against the wall, Akira watched their antics with a detached eye. So it was just, like, hanging out of his skull? Like, was it in his palm? He didn't mind being around these guys. They did whatever they wanted, regardless of how he would respond. It was much more relaxing than being with people who were always gauging his reactions. He didn't care to have others tell him where he belonged. If they thought he was going to play their game of superficial friendship, then they were doomed to be disappointed. He never said so out loud, but apparently it showed in his demeanor. People picking baseless fights with him had become just another part of his day-to-day life.
おいアキラなんとか言ってやれよこいつにさ一番バカなのはエースだよな
With his parted hair captured on both sides, D shot Akira a desperate look. Akira didn't mind hanging out with these guys, but of course, everything had its limit. Sighing, Akira reluctantly opened his mouth.
安心しろよ似た者同士だから
That was probably the first thing Akira had said since coming to this sector. As if they'd planned it, both of them looked at Akira at the same time with the same expression. Maybe the first thing he said since he's come to this sector. Has he never spoken to them before? They even mirrored each other in how their shoulders slumped crestfallen. This drew laughter from the scattered onlookers who had wandered in during the show. Looking up at the sky, Akira returned to his thoughts. Even if the moon vanished one day, things would be just fine, okay. Even without its light to guide them, those who crawled the earth would find some way to get by. In this place, there was rest from the strain of living. That's why Akira kept finding himself here. Soon Ace and D recovered, and the sound of their banter once again filled the comforting darkness. Sick. Only an hour or two after falling asleep, the thunderous bang of the door crashing in tore him from his precious rest. Footsteps pounded hard enough to make the bed springs creak, dragging Akira up out of slumber. Ooh, this is action music. In his half-asleep state, he couldn't process what was happening. This was Akira's apartment, a tiny room in a rundown building. Empty, but for a bed, a refrigerator, and a small lamp. The floor and walls were bleak concrete. To Akira, who needed little more than a place to eat, sleep, and shelter from the rain, it was a perfect room, comfortable and empty of meaning. Who had shattered his peace and quiet? Probably someone he'd beaten. Looking for revenge, it wouldn't be the first time. Too lethargic to rise, he remained sprawled in bed, even as he sensed them coming up beside him.
Oi, Okino!
Split second later, someone seized the front of his hair and yanked his head off the pillow. Ah! Interesting. Are these the cops? Oh, God. ACAB. But I think that is where I'm going to end this episode for today, guys. So, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Togainu no Chi, where we will see what the cops have to say and maybe get some more poorly explained lore. Bye, guys.